place was busy in a quiet way. People moved through the hall with small bags, cups of coffee, and tired faces. Some were waiting, some were passing through, and some were simply trying to fill time. Sounds blended together. Soft footsteps, distant voices, a door opening and closing, a phone buzzing somewhere. In one corner stood an old piano. Its surface showed signs of age, with scratches that told stories of many hands that had touched it before. Most people walked past it without a second glance. Near the piano stood a young woman. She did not stand out. She wore simple clothes and kept her posture calm, almost careful, as if she didn't want to take up much space. She had been there for a while, watching people come and go. She wasn't waiting for anyone. She wasn't performing. She was simply there, existing in the middle of a busy moment that didn't notice her. A small group nearby laughed about something on a phone screen. Another person leaned against a wall, scrolling, lost in thought. A child pulled at an adult's hand, asking questions that went unanswered. Life moved on without pause. Someone noticed the piano and made a casual comment. It wasn't serious, just one of those passing thoughts spoken out loud. The comment turned into a light suggestion, almost a joke. They wondered if anyone there could play. A few people smiled. Someone pointed toward the young woman, not because they knew anything about her, but because she happened to be closest. The suggestion reached her ears. She looked up, surprised, unsure if it was meant for her. For a moment, she didn't respond. She wasn't prepared for attention. She wasn't dressed for it. She wasn't planning to do anything at all. The person repeated the request, this time clearer but still friendly. It wasn't a demand. It was more like curiosity mixed with boredom. They asked if she could play a simple tune, nothing serious, just something short to pass the time. People nearby began to look. Not many, just a few. Their faces showed mild interest, not expectation. No one leaned forward. No one reached for a camera yet. This was not a stage. This was not a show. It was just a moment that could easily fade away. She hesitated. Her hands rested at her sides. Inside her mind, old thoughts stirred. Music had once been a big part of her life. Long days of practice. Quiet nights spent learning notes by memory. Dreams that once felt close enough to touch. And then, slowly, life had shifted. Responsibilities had grown heavier. Time had slipped away. Music became something she carried inside instead of something she shared. She had not touched a piano in a long time. The silence stretched for a second too long. She almost said no. That would have been easier. No attention. No risk. No memories waking up. But something held her there. She nodded slightly. It was a small movement, easy to miss, but it changed everything. She stepped closer to the piano. The bench was cold when she sat down. She adjusted herself, unsure at first, like someone visiting an old place after many years. Her fingers hovered above the keys without touching them. A few people smiled politely. One person shrugged, already losing interest. Another looked away, expecting nothing special. This was just a simple tune, after all. She took a slow breath. Her fingers pressed the first key. The sound was soft, clear, clean. It wasn't loud enough to demand attention, but it was steady enough to be noticed. The tune was simple, just as asked. No fast movements. No dramatic gestures. Just a gentle melody that felt familiar, like something heard long ago. At first, people barely reacted. Conversations continued. A laugh slipped out somewhere behind her. Phone buzzed again. Then came the second line of notes. Something shifted. The tune carried more weight than expected. It wasn't complex, but it was controlled. Each note landed with purpose, not rushed, not careless. The sound filled the space in a quiet way, like air slowly changing temperature. Someone nearby paused mid-sentence. Another person turned their head without realizing they had done so. She didn't look up. Her eyes stayed on the keys, but not in a tense way. Her shoulders relaxed as her hands remembered what to do. The piano no longer felt cold. It felt familiar, like an old friend that didn't ask questions. The melody continued, smooth and steady. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't meant to impress. but it carried feeling, the kind that comes from time and experience, not from trying to show off. A few steps away, a person lowered their phone. The laughter stopped. The background noise softened, not because someone asked for quiet, but because people naturally stopped making sound. Even the child grew still, watching without understanding why. The tune stayed simple, but it spoke. It held hints of joy, of loss, of patience. It felt like a story unfolding slowly, without words. Each note seemed placed with care, as if she was choosing exactly what to say and what to leave unsaid. She did not rush. She did not look around to see who was watching. She played as if the world had narrowed to just the piano and her hands. More people noticed now. Some stepped closer. Others stood where they were, frozen in place. No one spoke. It felt wrong to interrupt, like breaking a moment that could never be rebuilt once broken. The space around the piano changed. What had been a passing area turned into something quieter, almost personal. Even people who didn't care about music felt something pull at them. She reached the middle of the tune. Her hands moved with calm confidence. This was not muscle memory alone. This was emotion finding a way out after being held inside for too long. For her, time felt different. The worries of daily life faded into the background. The pressure, the noise, the expectations all slipped away. There was only the sound and the feeling of finally letting something speak that had been silent for years. She remembered late nights, small rooms, and dreams she once believed in. She remembered giving them up, not all at once, but little by little, until music became something she missed instead of something she lived. And yet, here it was, alive. The tune did not grow louder. It didn't need to. The quiet around it made it powerful. Every ear was tuned in now, even those who hadn't meant to listen. No one checked the time. No one looked away. The simple tune continued, steady and honest, carrying a feeling that words could not explain. And as the notes flowed through the space, the room seemed to hold its breath, unaware that this was only the beginning of a moment that would stay with everyone long after the final note faded. She played on, unaware of how deeply she had already changed the air around her. The first few notes had caught people off guard, but as the melody continued, it became clear that this was no ordinary moment. The young woman's fingers moved with a quiet confidence, each one pressing a key with intention. The sound was simple as requested, but it carried a depth that could not be ignored. It wasn't about speed or skill on display. It was about feeling, something that reached beyond the mechanics of music. A man standing near the coffee counter paused mid-sip. His eyes lifted from his cup and found the source of the sound. He didn't know what it was, but it made him stop thinking about work, bills, or meetings. It made him focus entirely on the piano, on the way the notes seemed to float in the air. Across the room, a woman who had been scrolling through her phone suddenly lowered it. Her attention shifted to the soft music, and for a moment, she forgot about the messages and notifications waiting for her. Even the child who had been tugging at a parent's hand stopped, eyes wide, listening as if the music had a story meant just for them. The melody was unhurried. Each note had space around it, a pause that allowed the sound to breathe. It wasn't a song anyone could have anticipated. It wasn't something played from a common sheet. It felt personal, as if it had been composed from memories, from small moments of life that were easy to overlook. Some people leaned in, drawn closer without realizing it, while others simply remained where they were, letting the sound wash over them. The music seemed to fill the space, yet it never felt crowded or overbearing. It fit perfectly into the quiet chaos of the room. She glanced down at her hands briefly, but her focus remained on the keys. Her fingers remembered patterns long unused, and her heart guided each motion. She did not play to impress, and she did not play for applause. She played because the music was a part of her, a language she had forgotten she still spoke. Each chord echoed a small piece of her story, a memory, a feeling, a fragment of time she had carried silently for years. People began to notice the subtle changes in her expression. There was a calm determination in her eyes, but also a hint of nostalgia. Her posture shifted slightly, as if the music had awakened something inside her that had been sleeping. The small movements of her shoulders and hands told of experience and practice, of countless hours spent in quiet rooms learning the language of the piano. She was no longer just a passerby, no longer someone unnoticed. In that moment, she commanded attention without saying a word. The audience, small and casual at first, started to grow more focused. Conversations that had been ongoing quietly faded into silence. Phones were forgotten. A few people leaned against walls, trying to seem casual but unable to hide the fact that they were captivated. They didn't know her, and they didn't know the story behind the music, yet they felt the weight of it. The sound reached places within them that words could not, stirring emotions they hadn't expected to feel in a public hall filled with strangers. The tune itself was modest. No dramatic flourishes, no fast scales, no grand gestures. But the simplicity was deceptive. Each note carried meaning. Each pause invited reflection. It was a reminder that beauty does not always shout, that sometimes the quietest moments have the most power. People began to realize that they were witnessing something rare, something that demanded attention not through spectacle but through authenticity. A young man sitting on a nearby bench adjusted his posture. He had been waiting for someone, tapping his foot impatiently, glancing at the door. Now he was rooted in place, caught by the melody. He could not explain why, but he felt an unspoken connection, as if the music had reached into his day and touched a memory long forgotten. Across the hall, an older woman closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over her. She thought of long-past afternoons spent listening to her own family play, of times filled with laughter and quiet peace. The piano seemed to hold all of these fragments, collecting them in the air and letting them drift gently toward everyone listening. The young woman did not glance at anyone in the crowd. She did not smile or seek approval. She simply played. The notes carried confidence, yet there was vulnerability too. It was as if the music itself was speaking for her, telling a story she had not yet put into words. The tune built slowly, not in speed or volume, but in presence. People felt the rise and fall, the small shifts in tempo, and the way her fingers lingered just a moment longer on certain keys, drawing out emotion that resonated deeply. A few more listeners had arrived, drawn by curiosity, but they stayed because of wonder. They didn't know why they were so drawn, only that they could not turn away. The melody seemed to fill a space in the mind and heart at the same time, a rare combination that made time feel slower. The world outside the hall became distant. For these few moments, there was only the music and the unspoken connection it created. As the tune progressed, subtle patterns emerged. Repeated phrases gave a sense of familiarity, yet each repetition carried a small change, a new emotion, a different emphasis. The listeners noticed these differences without consciously thinking about them. It was like hearing a story where each word matters, where each pause changes the meaning. The music held them, guided them, invited them to feel without judgment or expectation. The young woman's hands moved with increasing ease. What had begun as careful playing became natural, fluid. The hesitations of the first notes disappeared, replaced by confidence born of memory and instinct. She could have played anywhere, anytime, yet this place, with its hum of life and passing strangers, became the perfect stage for a moment that was fleeting yet unforgettable. She felt alive in the way she had not for years, a spark of something that had been missing. Those watching began to sense that they were experiencing a moment that could not be captured by photographs or recordings. The value was not in sharing it online or telling friends later. It was in the immediate, unrepeatable feeling. Even those who had not intended to listen found themselves holding their breath, trying not to interrupt the fragile magic of the moment. The melody continued to weave through the room, small and unassuming but impossible to ignore. Each note carried care and each pause carried thought. There was joy in the higher notes, a gentle sadness in the lower ones, and a quiet strength threading through everything. The audience felt it without naming it, sensing the human story hidden behind the keys. Time seemed to stretch and shrink at once. Seconds felt longer, yet hours might have passed in the depth of feeling that grew with each note. People became aware of the shared silence among them, a silence that was not awkward but filled with respect. They were all part of something they could not fully explain, a moment that belonged to no one and yet to everyone who had stopped to listen. The tune approached its midpoint, and the young woman's fingers danced lightly across the keys, remembering patterns that had once been second nature. She felt the music flowing through her, reminding her of nights spent alone practicing, of the patience required to master even the simplest melodies, and of the quiet satisfaction that came from creating sound from nothing. It was not performance, it was expression, and the difference was palpable to everyone around. A sense of anticipation grew among the listeners. They did not know what would come next, but they felt that something important was unfolding. The music was not loud, it did not command attention through volume, yet it held the room in its gentle grip. Even people who had arrived late and tried to pass unnoticed found themselves stopping, caught by the resonance of the notes and the quiet authority with which she played. The young woman, unaware of the growing attention, continued with the same calm focus. She had forgotten for a moment that she was playing for anyone at all. The music was not about them, but for her. Yet, in giving herself fully to the melody, she was connecting with every soul in the room. The energy was subtle but undeniable, an invisible thread linking the piano to hearts and minds alike. By the end of this part of the tune, the listeners were fully engaged. Conversations had stopped, phones were down, and eyes were fixed on the young woman as if she were telling a story without words. The simple melody had transformed the space, and for a few minutes, strangers shared a rare, human moment, united by the quiet, powerful presence of music. The room was no longer just a hall of passing people. It was a place where emotion and attention converged, carried by the touch of a woman and the keys beneath her fingers. It was a moment that would linger in memory long after it ended. The room had become quiet in a way that felt unusual yet natural. Conversations had completely stopped. The distant noises of the hall, the footsteps, the doors opening, the buzz of phones, had all faded into the background. It was as if the melody from the piano had absorbed every sound and held it in suspense. The young woman's fingers moved steadily, her eyes still on the keys, and her focus unbroken. The tune was simple, yet its impact grew with each passing note. People began to notice subtle changes in the music. There were small variations in tempo, little shifts in tone that gave the melody more emotion than before. It was like watching someone tell a story without words, each note carrying meaning, each pause inviting reflection. The audience felt the changes instinctively. They were not just hearing music, they were feeling it. There was a pause after a certain chord, and someone let out a quiet sigh. Another person shifted slightly, as if to catch a sound that had almost escaped them. The music reached inside, tugging at memories and emotions they did not expect to confront. The young woman's presence at the piano became magnetic. People who had initially been indifferent or distracted found themselves drawn closer. The man who had been leaning against the wall now stood, feet rooted, watching her hands move across the keys. The woman who had been scrolling through her phone held it tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the performer. Even the child, previously restless, sat on the floor, mesmerized by the rhythm and flow. It was no longer just a simple tune. The melody had evolved into a conversation, one that transcended words. People felt as though they were part of a private moment, even though it was happening in a public space. The young woman did not speak. She did not look at anyone, yet she connected with every person present, reaching into their hearts with something that could not be seen but could be deeply felt. Some listeners tried to understand how it could happen. The notes were not complex, not flashy, yet they held attention in a way that made it impossible to think of anything else. It was as if the music had created its own space, a bubble around the piano and those who had paused to listen. Even the regular sounds of life, the rolling carts, the coughs, the footsteps, seemed respectful, softened by the presence of something beautiful unfolding. The tune continued to weave through the air. Each repetition of a phrase was slightly different, subtle changes that deepened the feeling without disturbing the simplicity. Listeners noticed these small differences, some consciously, some intuitively. They realized that this was not performance for applause, nor was it an attempt to impress. This was something pure, born from memory, emotion, and perhaps a lifetime of unspoken experience. The young woman's expression remained calm, yet her eyes sometimes reflected faint glimpses of the past. She had been away from music for a long time, life pulling her in other directions. Responsibilities, worries, and the demands of everyday living had replaced the hours once spent learning notes and melodies. Yet in this moment, she reclaimed a piece of herself, allowing the music to speak freely, filling a space she had not realized was empty. The audience responded unconsciously. Some closed their eyes to focus, some leaned forward, and some simply stood still, holding their breath as if afraid to disturb the fragile magic. No one clapped, no one whispered. The silence was natural, a shared respect that transcended explanation. Even the child, sensing the weight of the moment, remained silent, wide-eyed, absorbing the sound and its quiet power. It was not just the notes themselves that held attention. It was the way she played them. Each key was pressed with care, each transition smooth, each pause meaningful. There was no rush, no exaggeration, no attempt to fill space with sound. The music was gentle but strong, intimate yet open. It had room for everyone's emotions, allowing the listeners to connect with it in their own way. Some felt joy, others sadness, some nostalgia, and yet all were connected by the same thread of quiet wonder. A few people shifted to get a better view. They had initially stopped by curiosity, but now they could not look away. There was something human about her performance, something that could not be replicated or taught. It was the experience behind the music, the unspoken stories woven into the notes. The simplicity of the tune was deceptive. Beneath it lay years of practice, patience, and feeling. It was a reminder that true art does not always shout. It sometimes whispers and touches the heart without warning. Time seemed to behave differently. Seconds stretched into minutes, yet no one felt bored. Every moment held importance. Each note carried weight and intention, and the audience understood it instinctively. The young woman's connection to the piano created a rhythm that synchronized with the listener's own senses. People forgot their distractions, their schedules, their worries. They were fully present, experiencing something rare and fleeting. Even those who had been skeptical at first were captivated. They had expected something ordinary, a simple tune to fill a brief pause in the day. Instead, they found themselves immersed in emotion, carried along by a melody that spoke in ways words could not. It was not dramatic or forceful, but it was undeniable. People felt it in their chests, in their minds, in a quiet corner of themselves that they rarely visited. The young woman did not change her pace or volume. She remained in control, letting the music breathe. Her calmness added to the effect, showing that the beauty was not in chaos or complexity, but in clarity and sincerity. Each note landed exactly where it should, each pause allowed reflection, and each phrase felt intentional. The melody became a bridge, connecting people across age, experience, and expectation. Strangers found themselves sharing a moment that was intimate, personal, and universal all at once. The audience noticed the subtle details, the rise and fall of her hands, the gentle shifts in tempo, the slight lingering on certain keys. All contributed to a feeling that was larger than the sum of its parts. People unconsciously mirrored her focus, their attention sharpening, their emotions deepening. It was as if the piano and its player had cast a spell over the room, one that demanded respect and quiet participation. Some listeners experienced memories long forgotten. A certain chord reminded them of a childhood afternoon, a fleeting moment of happiness. A pause in the melody brought a pang of longing, a reflection of something lost or missed. Even without knowing her story, the audience felt the weight of hers. The music carried it without words, without explanation, simply through the honesty of sound and touch. By now, the room was completely silent except for the piano. The young woman's focus never wavered, yet it was clear that she sensed the attention. Not in a way that sought approval, but in a quiet acknowledgement that something important was happening. She allowed the music to unfold naturally, letting each note find its place, letting the tune tell its story as it wished. The audience responded without effort, completely absorbed, collectively experiencing a moment that could not be planned or repeated. Even those who had been busy before, the workers, the visitors, the passers-by, felt the shift in energy. They sensed that the music had created a temporary sanctuary, a place outside of routine where attention, emotion, and human connection converged. It was rare, unexpected, and unpretentious. No one wanted it to end, yet no one dared rush it. They were witnesses to something that required patience, care, and quiet participation. As the middle of the tune approached, subtle tension built in the melody. It was not dramatic, not in a conventional sense, but enough to make listeners lean in slightly, curious, anticipating where it might go next. Each note mattered, each pause was deliberate, and the gentle complexity of the rhythm deepened the impact. People could feel the care behind every movement, the time and experience that had led to this moment. The music was no longer just a sound. It was a presence, a living thing in the room, quietly commanding respect. By the end of this part of the tune, everyone was fully engaged. The young woman's fingers moved with grace and precision, her body relaxed yet alert. The audience had become silent in a shared, unspoken understanding. Conversations had ceased, phones remained in pockets or hands lowered, and eyes were fixed on the piano. A simple tune, requested casually, had transformed an ordinary hall into a place of connection, reflection, and awe. It was a moment that no one would forget, even after the last note faded into silence, a shared experience etched into memory by the quiet power of music. The melody had reached a point where it felt alive, filling the space in a way that went beyond simple notes. The young woman continued to play with calm precision, but there was a sense now that the music was telling more than just a tune. Each note carried a piece of her story, a hint of her past, a shadow of memories long tucked away. The audience could feel it, though they could not name the details. The music spoke in a language everyone understood, yet no one could put into words. A few people began to glance at one another, their eyes wide with quiet amazement. They had expected something ordinary, something brief and forgettable, but what they heard was far from ordinary. The melody had depth, and with that depth came the sense that it was born from experience, from emotion, from a life that had known both joy and sorrow. Some listeners shifted closer, as if proximity might let them understand it more fully. Others simply remained still, captivated by the unspoken conversation happening through the keys. She played without looking up, hands moving naturally, guided by memory and feeling. Every pause, every gentle press of a key, seemed intentional. There was no rush, no grand flourish, only an honesty that filled the room. The notes whispered of long nights of practice, of quiet afternoons spent alone learning to express what words could not. The audience could sense it without asking, their attention held entirely by the melody and the presence of the woman behind it. Some people began to wonder who she was, how someone could play like that without warning, without rehearsal in front of strangers. Others thought about the courage it took to step forward and play, knowing that anyone could hear but few would understand. The tune itself was simple, yet the depth behind it made every note feel profound. It was not about skill alone. It was about heart, about emotion that could not be faked, about years of life experience channeled into sound. The audience was silent, but that silence was alive with feeling. A man who had been restless moments ago now leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed, absorbing every subtle shift in tone. A woman who had been tired and impatient with her day suddenly felt a lightness in her chest, a strange comfort brought by the music. Even the child seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, watching intently, a quiet awe in their expression. It became clear that the young woman was not just playing a tune. She was sharing a piece of herself. The audience could feel it instinctively, even if they could not name what it was. They understood that this was more than performance. It was a revelation, a glimpse into the life of someone who had once lived deeply with music, who had carried stories within her and was now letting them flow through the piano. The melody continued, weaving through the air with gentle strength. It carried hints of past sadness, touches of joy, and a quiet resilience that could only come from experience. Each note landed with intention, each pause allowed reflection. The music seemed to embrace everyone present, creating a connection between people who had never met and a performer who was a stranger to them. It was as if the piano had become a bridge, linking hearts and emotions in a way that words could not achieve. As she played, subtle recognition appeared in some faces. Perhaps someone remembered seeing her before, in another place, in another time, performing quietly, unnoticed. Perhaps they recognized the look in her eyes, the careful control of her hands, the patience and grace in her playing. Others simply sensed the life she had lived, the stories she had carried, without knowing any details. It was an unspoken truth revealed through sound, a story without words that everyone could feel. The young woman herself seemed unaware of the growing awareness around her. She played as if the world beyond the piano did not exist, yet in doing so, she affected everything around her. The audience was no longer passive. They were part of the moment, fully present, participating in the emotional flow of the music without making a sound. Each person experienced it differently, yet all shared the same sense of quiet wonder and deep respect. The room held its breath as the tune reached moments of subtle intensity. There were rises and falls, not dramatic but significant, giving the music a life of its own. Listeners could feel it in their chests, a resonance that reminded them of long ago moments, of feelings they had tucked away. Some eyes glistened slightly, though no one whispered or looked away. The music had created a space where emotion could be felt openly, safely, without words or judgment. The young woman's hands moved with increasing ease, flowing naturally over the keys. Her focus was absolute, yet there was a softness in her movements that spoke of kindness, understanding, and vulnerability. Each note was deliberate, each pause carefully measured. The simplicity of the tune masked its emotional complexity, and the audience sensed that it was the honesty behind the simplicity that made it so powerful. This was not about impressing anyone. It was about sharing a part of herself that had been quiet for too long. Some listeners began to recognize patterns in the music, small repetitions with subtle variations that added layers of meaning. It was like hearing a story unfold in real time, a story of resilience, of memory, and of quiet strength. People felt the weight of those stories, even without knowing them, and it created a bond among those present. Strangers were connected in their shared experience, united by the vulnerability and beauty of the performance. The young woman did not seek recognition or approval. She played purely for the music and the emotion it allowed her to express. Yet, through that honesty, she had captured the attention and hearts of everyone in the room. The audience could feel the sincerity in her playing, and it resonated deeply. This was not a show. It was a revelation, a glimpse into a life lived with passion and feeling, now shared in an unassuming moment. Time seemed to stretch and contract, the outside world fading completely. People forgot their schedules, their worries, their distractions. The piano and the woman at it had become the center of everything. Listeners became aware of the shared silence, a silence that was not empty but full of understanding, respect, and connection. They were witnesses to a moment that was fleeting yet eternal, ordinary yet extraordinary. As the tune continued, the audience began to feel the unspoken narrative behind it. There were hints of struggle, of perseverance, of moments of joy and sorrow. Each note carried fragments of a life, subtle cues that told a story without words. Some listeners felt a pang of nostalgia, others felt hope, and all felt a deep appreciation for the courage it took to reveal so much through such a simple act. The music had become a mirror, reflecting pieces of the listener's own experiences and emotions back to them. The young woman's fingers danced lightly over the keys, bringing the melody to small crescendos and gentle falls. The subtle variations in rhythm and tone created a sense of movement, as if the music were guiding everyone through a shared journey. Listeners were drawn in completely, unable to look away, unable to think of anything else. It was a rare moment of connection, where emotion transcended language and everyone present became part of the story being told. By now, the hall was completely absorbed in the music. No one spoke, no one moved unnecessarily, and no one interrupted the flow. The young woman's presence and the simplicity of the tune had created an atmosphere that was both intimate and expansive. Every person felt a personal connection to the music, Yet they also felt part of a larger experience, a collective witness to something deeply human and profoundly moving. When she finally reached the final notes of this part of the tune, there was a moment of pause, a silence that lingered longer than any other. It was not awkward or forced. It was a natural response to the depth of feeling that had been shared. Listeners held their breath, caught between the desire to applaud and the understanding that some moments are too sacred for immediate reaction. The music had revealed something hidden, something personal yet universal, and everyone knew it would stay with them long after they left the room. This part of the tune was more than sound. It was a revelation, a story revealed through the piano and the hands of someone who had lived, experienced, and felt deeply. The audience understood, without being told, that they had witnessed a rare moment of honesty and connection. It was a reminder that simple acts, when filled with sincerity and heart, could leave lasting impressions, touching lives in ways no one could anticipate. The young woman, unaware of the profound effect she had created, continued to play, each note a quiet testament to the power of music and human emotion. The final notes of the tune lingered in the air, soft and delicate, fading slowly into the quiet of the hall. For a brief moment, no one moved or spoke. The music had finished, but its presence remained, filling the space with a sense of calm, reflection, and unspoken connection. People were caught between the instinct to applaud and the realization that this was a moment too special to rush or break. They sat or stood in silence, letting the last vibrations of the piano resonate within them. The young woman lowered her hands gently from the keys. She did not rush, did not turn to see faces, did not look for approval or recognition. Her eyes were calm, yet there was a subtle warmth in them, as if she understood the impact she had created without a single word spoken. Her body relaxed, but she remained seated, letting the quiet settle around her. The piano, old and familiar, seemed to exhale with the room, as though acknowledging the weight of what had just occurred. Slowly, the audience began to respond. Applause started as small claps, hesitant at first, like people testing the waters of a moment too fragile to disturb. Then it grew, a gentle wave that filled the hall without overwhelming the quiet reverence that had settled. Some clapped softly, almost shyly, moved by the depth of feeling they had experienced. Others could not stop themselves from cheering quietly, smiles spreading across faces that had been touched by something unexpected, something deeply human. A few people rose from benches and chairs, approaching the piano to get a closer look. Their eyes were wide, curious, and respectful. They saw the care in her posture, the light in her expression, and the natural confidence in her movements. Even without speaking, they felt they had witnessed something extraordinary. A connection had been made, a bridge built between a performer and an audience that would not soon be forgotten. As the room settled again, conversations began to bloom, quiet and reflective. People spoke in hushed tones, sharing what they had felt. Some admitted they had not expected much, only a simple tune, and yet they had found themselves moved in ways they could not have imagined. Others spoke of memories awakened, moments from their past that had surfaced in response to the music. Laughter and gentle sighs punctuated these conversations, all underlined by a shared sense of awe and respect. The young woman stood slowly, taking a small step back from the piano. She gave a brief nod, acknowledging the silent gratitude and respect of those around her. She did not need to speak. Her presence and the music had already communicated everything that mattered. People understood that she had offered more than notes. She had shared a piece of her life, her history, and her heart. And in return, they had listened, felt, and appreciated in a way that words could not capture. Some members of the audience approached to offer thanks, their voices gentle and sincere. They did not ask for encores or attention, simply expressing appreciation for the moment they had shared. The young woman accepted these words quietly, with soft smiles and nods. She did not linger in the spotlight. She had given what she could, and now it was time to step away, leaving the impact of her music to linger naturally in the hearts of those who had listened. The hall began to return to its usual rhythm. People moved on with their day, some still glancing back at the piano, others carrying the memory of the moment quietly within them. The energy in the room had shifted, though subtly. There was a sense of connection, a reminder of the power of music and human expression to touch lives unexpectedly. Even as life resumed, the echo of the tune remained, a gentle reminder that moments of beauty often arrive without warning, and their impact can be long-lasting. The young woman walked away from the piano, each step calm and measured. She did not rush. She did not seek recognition or praise beyond what had already been given through her music. Her mind was quiet, reflecting not on the reactions of others, but on the simple act of creating sound, of sharing something that had been waiting within her for years. She carried a sense of fulfillment, knowing that the music had reached people in ways that were honest and profound. Outside the hall, people continued their routines, but something had changed. Those who had listened could feel it, an invisible thread connecting them to the experience they had shared. Conversations occasionally returned to the piano, to the unexpected depth of the tune, to the calm presence of the young woman who had turned a simple request into a moment of lasting human connection. Some found themselves humming the melody later, as if their own lives had been gently touched by the story carried in the music. For the young woman, the day continued quietly. She moved among others without fanfare, blending into the world as if she were invisible. Yet the impact of her music lingered, a quiet echo in the hearts of all who had listened. She understood that the beauty of the moment did not need to be announced or repeated. It existed fully in the shared silence, in the unspoken recognition that sometimes the simplest acts can carry the deepest meaning. As evening approached, memories of the tune persisted. People remembered the subtle shifts in melody, the care in each note, and the authenticity behind every pause. They remembered the stillness that had enveloped the room, the way the music had held them, and the quiet power of a simple act done with honesty and heart. The young woman had given more than a performance. She had given a glimpse into the depth of human experience, leaving behind a story that would be carried silently by those who had been present. Days later, people would recall that moment with clarity. They would tell themselves how unexpected it had been, how a simple tune had brought stillness, reflection, and connection in a busy, ordinary space. The young woman would remain a quiet figure in their memory, her presence at the piano a symbol of what can happen when someone shares their heart without hesitation or expectation. And though she had moved on, life continued. The impact of her music endured, echoing in small, subtle ways in the lives of those who had listened, a reminder that genuine expression and human connection are treasures found when least expected.